Our Bible word is Mark 16, verse 14. Later he appeared to the 11 as they sat at the table, and he rebuked their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they did not believe those who had seen him after he had risen. So here we have some additional material to the Gospel of Mark. If you look at the oldest manuscripts, it appears that the Gospel of Mark actually ended at verse 8. That is where it says, "So they," that's the woman, "went out quickly and fled from the tomb, for they trembled and were amazed, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid." So the evangelists ended the gospel on a very dramatic note. Of course, throughout the gospel, it's clear that Jesus will raise from the dead. But towards the end of the first century and later on, there were some people or some scribes who thought, no, you can't end the gospel like this. So they added some resurrection material. Because the other gospels had resurrection material where Jesus actually appears to disciples. And there are actually 4 or 5 different endings known to the Gospel of Mark, where there's a longer ending, like we have it here in our New King James Bible, but also some shorter endings are also known in the early manuscript tradition of the Gospel. And they borrowed from Matthew a bit, they borrowed a little bits and pieces from John's Gospel, and also looks mostly from Luke, because we hear of the 2 that went in the country, that's borrowed from Luke. Also the account of Jesus' ascension and the preaching of the apostles and the work they did, that's from Luke. There's also instruction of Jesus in Mark to baptize, that's similar to that Great Commission we find in Matthew's Gospel. And he also mentions here that Mary Magdalene was told, or Jesus appeared to Mary Magdalene, but they did not believe her. So if we go to Mark 16, verse 11, it says, "And when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they did not believe." And we find similar traditions of doubt also in the other Gospels. For example, if we go to Matthew 28, verse 17, it says, "When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted." Here's a resurrection account of Jesus appearing to his disciples in Galilee, on a mountain in Galilee. And here the evangelist says some doubted. Also in Luke 24, verse 11, "And their words seemed," that's the words of the woman. The woman came to tell the disciples that the angels told them that Jesus raised. So, and their words of the woman seemed to them, that's the disciples, like idle tales, and they did not believe them. So another account of doubt. When of course is the account of doubting Thomas in the Gospel of John, where he says there, "Unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, etc., I will not believe." So there's doubt in the resurrection, and this is expressed in all the Gospels. Of course, the first century people knew that people just don't rise from the dead, and it was something totally unexpected. The Messiah was supposed to be this hero, this conquering figure. There was no expectations of the general populace that the Messiah will be put to death and be humiliated. Even though the Gospels say that Jesus repeatedly said, "I'm going to die, I'm going to rise again," when Jesus was defeated, it was crushing for the disciples, because now it's over. I mean, their hero, their teacher, who they thought is the Messiah, was crucified. He was humiliated. It looked like defeat. And there was, for them, they couldn't comprehend now there's going to be anything like a resurrection. It was totally unexpected. And here Jesus appears, according to the gospel accounts, and introduces something completely novel, a new thing. The Messiah was to die. He was also to rise again from the dead. So you get this feeling in the Gospels that there's this perplexity, this, can this be true? What's going on here? How is this really happening? That kind of sentiment. So there's doubt also in Jesus' resurrection. And then Jesus also, in some instances, gives a rebuke. For example, if you come to our Bible word that's in Mark, Later he appeared to the 11 as they sat at the table, and he rebuked their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they did not believe those who had seen him after he had risen. We find a similar rebuke also in Luke 24, verse 38. He said to them, "Why are you frightened? And why do doubts arise in your hearts?" There's also the rebuke of doubting Thomas in the Gospel of John. Jesus says there, "Do not be unbelieving, but believing." So there's this doubt in the resurrection. It was unexpected. As it happened, people were bewildered. Is this really happening? Can this be true? What's going on? It's this sense of being perplexed and confused, and there's also maybe wonder and awe all confused into one that gives doubt. But Jesus also rebukes the disciples, say, "Why don't you believe it? I'm here with you in the flesh, I'm eating with you." And our Bible word also discusses it. But of course, in an indirect way, it also speaks to all followers of Christ. Do not doubt in the resurrection, because it has really taken place.